Glorious game creating Swifters, it's Prof. G, and in this lesson we are going to add game mechanics to the WordGarden app, meaning we'll actually write the code so that we can play a game. We'll update the gameplay as we guess words and allow for the game to restart when all words have been guessed. And we'll update the flower image with each incorrectly guessed letter. Now we'll be adding animation and sound in the next video, but we're getting close to finishing up our first SwiftUI game. Ready to code? Giddy up! If you're new here, welcome. You might want to check out the course playlist to see how we got here. So at this point, the game status message in our WordGarden app holds the message currently labeled, how many guesses to uncover the hidden word. But we want this to update after each guess, telling the user how many guesses they've made, and eventually we're going to want to show whether they've guessed or missed the complete word, and also give a message when they've guessed all of the words. So first, we should show a message that says something like, you've made X number of guesses after each guess. And to do this, we need to keep track of the number of letters that have been guessed, but we're already kind of doing this. We can simply use the count of letters guessed string. And since we'll need to update this code and some other code inside the closure where the guess a letter button is pressed, as well as inside of the onSubmit closure when the done key is pressed, let's create a new function to hold our gameplay updates. So we'll do this right underneath the guess a letter function before the final closure in the struct. So we'll say func. And why don't we call this update gameplay, lower camel case, open and close parens, no parameters are going to be passed in here, and we'll open and close curlies. And then let's call update gameplay, and we'll do that in the onSubmit closure just after we call guess a letter, and in the guess a letter button closure also after we call guess a letter. And now let's update the game status message inside our new function update gameplay like this. Game status message equals, you've made string_interp guesses, and inside string_interp we'll say lettersGuess.count. Now this works, but the guesses should be singular when the count is 1. Right now it says you've made 1 guesses instead of you've made 1 guess. Now we're going to fix this with the ternary operator and standard strings, but there's actually a much better way to do this. Apple has a way of coding when plurals might be needed and using the proper plural for whatever the app's language is. It's very cool, but it involves localized string keys and inflex, 2 topics we haven't covered yet, and localized string keys also make handling types of strings much more complex. So I'm going to put a to-do comment in here, redo this with localized string key and inflect, and we'll get back to this in a future lesson. We've got a lot of complexity in this lesson, and we don't need to further complicate things by introducing something outside of our gameplay mechanics. So for now, we'll use this regular string and a ternary operator inside. So right after guesses, I'm going to delete the ES, I'm going to put in a string_interp with no space, and I'll say lettersGuess.count equals 1, so that's the condition that's true or false. Then question mark, if this is true, then we want this to be singular, so I'll just pass in an empty string with double quotes, colon, but if it's false, I'm going to pass in between double quotes, ES, to turn guess into guesses, for plural. Run this. After 1 guess, it's just guess. After more than 1 guess, we've got guesses. Looking good. Now we should check to see if the letter guessed by the player is correct or not, and if it's not a correct guess, then we should keep track of how many guesses the user still has. So we'll need a variable for that, and when a wrong guess has been made, we should subtract 1 from this new variable. So let's create a variable to keep track of how many guesses the player still has, and we'll call this guesses remaining, so we'll do this up top with the other state variables. And I'll put this right under letters guessed, although you could pretty much put it anywhere. And I'll say at state private var guesses remaining equals 8. And it's 8 because there are 8 petals on the flower, and we have 1 image for the flower with 8 petals, 7 petals, 6 petals. They're named flower 8, flower 7, flower 6, and we want to lose 1 petal with each incorrect guess. But when the user's done guessing a word and they move on to the next word, we're going to have to reset this value in our code. And rather than hard code this as the value 8 in our code, it's better programming practice to set up a constant so that if you wanted to at some point use a different number of images that allowed for more or fewer guesses, you could simply update that constant in just one place, and that would change the value all throughout the code wherever you refer to that constant. Now this is going to be a bit tricky because we want a constant, but we also want to use that constant value to initialize this variable, and Swift is going to get grumpy when we try to do this. See, down here I'll say private let maximum guesses equals 8. And so you might think, okay, now all I need to do is go up here and initialize guesses remaining to maximum guesses instead of 8. But no, Xcode gives us the little red circle of anger, and the description here is not very helpful for the new programmer. But here's what's happening. These properties, the variables and constants, are all initialized together before the view first loads. They're not initialized one at a time, so even if I were to place the let constant above guesses remaining, Xcode would still grump. They're not created yet, so I can't refer to one when initializing another. It doesn't exist. You're trying to refer to something that's not there. But we have a workaround. In our constant maximum guesses, we can put the static keyword between private and let. What does this do? It makes this constant available even without creating the content view. Sounds weird, but that means it's available even before the view loads. Now we'll see in future lessons why static is really useful, but for now, just know that static allows us to refer to it when we initialize our other variables. Now I'll also tell you there are lots of other ways around this. In large projects, you might create a separate file with constants listed. We haven't worked with multiple files yet. I'll show you that technique later in the course. For now, this is a fine solution, and since static values are created before these other values, I'm just going to cut the static constant out here, and I'm going to paste it up as the first property in our struct. We don't need to do that for our code to work, but most developers will do that because it makes more intuitive sense when it's first on the list. So now if some point in the future you want to modify this game with more or fewer images, you can change this one constant in one place instead of having to hunt down every place in the code where we refer to 8. And you'll see we refer to this constant later on in this lesson. Now another thing I'll mention is when we refer to the static property inside of our struct, we're going to refer to it using the word self with a capital S followed by dot in the constant name. So I've got this in a comment just to remind me to do it later. Now down in the update gameplay method, let's check to see if the guessed letter is in the word_to_guess. And if it's not, we'll subtract one from guesses remaining. So we'll say if wordToGuess.contains, and we'll pass guess letter in between the parentheses, and we've got open and close curlies after this. But what we really want to do is not find when wordGuess contains guessed letter, but we want to find out when it does not contain guessed letter. So we can do this simply by adding an exclamation point in front of wordToGuess. And this will be true when the opposite happens, or when wordToGuess does not contain guessed letter. Remember, the exclamation point acts as a not, so it flips true to false or false to true. And one very important thing we need to do. We set wordToGuess to an empty string up here in the guessALetter function right at the end. Let's cut this out and we'll paste it to the end of the update gameplay function so we can be sure that we have a value in guessed letter up here when we check to see if guessed letter is inside of wordToGuess. Then inside the curlies we just wrote, if wordToGuess doesn't contain guessed letter, we guessed a wrong letter, so we should subtract 1 from the guesses remaining with guesses remaining, and we'll use the shorthand minus equals 1. Now if we have this, we can use guesses remaining to update the image name, passing in the value for the flower number that we should use. So after we subtract 1 from guess remaining, let's write image name equals, in double quotes, flower, string interp, passing in guesses remaining. And let's try this out. And as this runs, let me also point out that the next change that we're going to want to make. You see how the game status message starts out on 2 lines here? It says how many guesses to uncover the hidden word. Now watch this text view. The height is going to change when we change the text inside of it. So press guess a letter. It says you made 1 guess, singular, which is good, but the height in this is only 1 line, so my interface changes locations. It looks like it jumps up on my screen, and you usually don't want that to happen in your app. That's not a good look. So the next thing we need to do is to set a fixed height for the text view. But let's keep testing for the change that we just made in our code. So if I type Q's in here, so the first word is Swift, it has no Q, and each time I enter an incorrect letter, the Q, I see the flower has 1 less leaf in it. Nice! Now let me just speed through making 8 incorrect guesses. And so when we reach this point in the app, when we have no guesses remaining, I should hide the text field and the guess a letter button and show the another word button. That's the button a user can press if they want to guess another word. We'll want to fix that as well, and we see that didn't happen here. But first, let's set a fixed height to the text view so that our interface doesn't jump around after we make our first guess. And what I want to do is find the text view with game status message in it. And just before the padding modifier, I'm going to add a frame modifier with dot frame and in between parens. All I need is the height parameter. So that's lowercase height, colon, and I'm going to set this to 80. I actually tested it out beforehand, and 80 seems to work well. And while I'm at it, just below this, I'm also going to include the dot minimum scale factor modifier, passing in 0.5. So if I need even more room, I'm going to shrink down the font. And we will have a situation when the users guessed all the words where we're going to have even more text in here, so we will eventually take advantage of minimum scale factor. So let's test this in preview. Here we're starting out with a how many guesses message on 2 lines, and then if I guess a single letter, the interface no longer jumps since the text view has a fixed height of 80 points. Nice. So now we need to allow the user to click the another word button so that they can play another word when they're done guessing the current word. When are they done guessing the current word? When one of 2 things happen. First, when the word is correctly guessed, and that happens when there are no underscores in the revealed word. They've guessed all the letters. Or when we've run out of guesses, that would be when guesses remaining equals 0. So let's code this. In update gameplay, after we update the flower image, I'll enter a comment, when do we play another word? If revealed word dot contains, I'll put in a string which is just an underscore character, open and close curlies, but of course what we're looking for here is not when the revealed word has an underscore or contains an underscore, but when it does not contain an underscore. That means all the letters have been guessed. So in order to find out when it does not contain an underscore, we can put the not operator, the exclamation point, in front of revealed word here, and I'll put a comment at the end of this line, guessed, meaning a word, when no underscore in revealed word. Then down below the if clause, we need an else, and this else should be an else if. Guesses remaining equals 0. That means we've run out of all of our guesses, and in the comment here is word missed. In other words, the player used up all their guesses. So what do we do in this first set of curlies if the player guessed the word? Well, we're going to set the game status message equal to, you guessed it. It took you string interp guesses to guess the word, and in the string interp we'll pass in lettersGuessed.count. And then below this, we'll say words guessed plus equals 1. That's going to update the game stats at the top of our app. And we'll add 1 to our current word index with current word index plus equals 1. And to get the interface to show the another word button and to hide the text field in the guess a letter button, we need to set the play again hidden button equal to false. Remember, that's that Boolean value we set with an if statement back when we created the interface for this app. And then down here, if we run out of guesses, we want to do something similar to what we did above, but we're going to set the game status message equal to, so sorry, you're all out of guesses. Then we'll increment words missed with words missed plus equal 1. Again, that will update the game status up top. And we'll also say current word index plus equals 1, so we can move on to the next word. And we also need to set play again hidden equal to false, again, so that another word button shows, and we hide the text field and the guess a letter button. Now also notice this code up here. When we first updated the game status message, we only update the game status message like this when we haven't guessed a word or run out of guesses. So why don't we highlight this line, cut it out, and we'll add an else clause to our if statement, and we'll paste this into the else clause because we only do this when we haven't guessed a word or run out of guesses. And I'll put a comment in here in the else clause that just says, keep guessing. So those are our 3 alternatives when the user's either guessed the word, or they've lost because they've run out of guesses, or they can continue guessing. Now let's try this out in the preview. I'll guess the correct letter S, but then I'll guess all incorrect letters. What happens when we have 8 bad guesses? Flowers wilted. And we get the so sorry message, and the text field and the guess a letter button are properly hidden, and the another word button properly shows. Plus, we get the stats have been updated up top on our app. We see that 1 word was missed, and we have 2 more words left to guess. Very nice. I'll Option Command P to start the app over again. And why don't we guess the word properly this time with SWIFT? And we get a game status message of, you've guessed it. It took you 5 guesses to guess the word. Great. Now clicking another word doesn't do anything yet, so let's add the game mechanics for resetting to another word if the button is pressed. So we'll enter code for playing another word up in the button action for another word, and we can finally delete this to do comment because we're going to add another word action in here, and we'll add a new comment, reset after word was guessed or missed. So now let's think through what we need to do when the user clicks another word. Well, first we need to set up the next word to get. Now we've already incremented the current word by 1, so here we should be able to just say wordToGuess equals wordsToGuess. Make sure that you select the plural, that's the string array, and we'll pass in between square brackets currentWordIndex. Then we need to reset the revealed word to all underscores, and hey, we already wrote the code for this. Remember we copied and pasted it in from the code we wrote in our playground 2 lessons ago? So I'm going to press Command F to bring up the find bar, and I'm just going to type revealed word up here, and I see it in this line here in on appear. So I'm going to highlight this code, copy it, and up in another word button, I'll paste it into that button action. So now our new word will show up as all underscores. Then we need to set the letters guessed back to empty string because the user is going to start to guess new letters for this new word. So that's just letters guessed equals empty string. Then we need to reset the guesses remaining back to 8, or we should use the constant that we created. So we'll just say guesses remaining equals. And I'd mentioned earlier that we can't just mention the static property name maximum guesses. That won't work when you reference a struct's own static properties. So we could give the struct's name before the static property like this, contentview.maximumGuesses, but you'll often see instead self with a capital S .maximumGuesses. So just remember to include one of those, the struct name or capital S self, when using a static property inside its struct. And then we need to show a fresh flower with image name equals the string flower, string interp, passing in guesses remaining. Then we'll reset the game status message string to what we had at the start of the game, which was just how many guesses to uncover the hidden word, ? Then we'll need to hide this another word button and show the text field and guess a letter button, and we do that by setting the play again hidden equal to true. So let's try to run this in Canvas. So I'm going to enter an S, a W, and a bunch of Qs. So I haven't guessed this first word. I've run out of guesses. I get a message in game message status that says, sorry, you're all out of guesses. I see the another word button. I'm going to click another word. And now I see things have restarted properly. I'm going to enter dog, D-O-G, and cat, C-A-T. But now look what happens after I click another word after successfully guessing the word cat, which was the last word in my words to guess array. And boom, the code crashes. Now, when code crashes in live preview, it's kind of tough to tell where it crashed and why. You get a lot of useless information in a dialog box, but here's a pro tip. You can click OK to get rid of this dialog box and then build and run in the simulator. If you do this, more often than not, the line where the error occurred will be highlighted in red, and you can click on that line or look on the console for an error message that's usually much easier to read than anything that you would find hidden inside of the error report dialog box. And now I'm going to go through guessing 3 words really quickly to get where my code crashed before. So Swift and dog and cat, and at the end of cat, I'm going to click another word, and the debug navigator pops up on the left, but even better, the line where my code crashes is highlighted so I can see where the crash happened, and down in the console I can see index out of range. The little red circle of anger in the line where it crashed also says the same thing. Oh yeah, if I'm incrementing current word index by 1, and then when I try to access a value in words_to_guess that's 1 greater than the last element in that array, then my code's gonna crash because the index is out of range. I'm 1 more than the maximum number of elements in that array. So I need to recognize when my current word index is equal to the wordsToGuess.count, and if this is the case, then I should do everything I need to in order to reset the game, not just reset the word. So let's do this. So I've already hit the navigation pane. I'm going to hide the debug pane and click stop to clear out our error line in our code. And one thing I want to do is when the user has guessed all of the words, the name on the another word button should be different. I don't want it to say another word. If they've guessed all the words, I want it to say something like restart game ? So instead of hard coding another word in here for the button title, let's create a variable to hold a title that we can change. So up top in our properties, I'll put this right underneath where I say play again hidden is true, and I'll say at state private var play again button label equals, and we'll initially set this to another word ? So that's the first title that that button should have. And now at the end of our update gameplay function, we can change the value for the play again button if we've guessed all the words. So just before we set guess letter equal to empty string, we'll say if current word index equals wordsToGuess.count, open and close curlies. Now remember, we incremented current word index up here, and the last element of any array is going to be its count -1. So if this is true, then we've exceeded the number of words that are available to guess, meaning the number of words in the array words_to_guess. We've tried to guess them all. So if that's the case, then in between the curlies, we want to set play again button label, the value we just created, equal to the string restart game ? And let's also add to our game status message. So we'll say game status message equals game status message plus, and in between quotes, we'll say \n, so we're going to add a line feed, and at the end we'll just say, you've tried all the words, period, restart from the beginning ? And now up in the another word button action, let's first replace the button title in here. So we shouldn't have the string literal another word in here. Let's highlight and delete that and replace it with play again button label, that value we just created and we just set down in our update gameplay function. So now inside this button action, we want to add code to reset gameplay, and we only want to do this if we've guessed all the words. So I'm going to add a comment that says if all the words have been guessed, and we check this with the code if current word index equals wordsToGuess.count, open and close curlies. So the same check we did in the previous function, and in between the curlies, what we're going to do is reset current word index equals 0. On the next line, words guessed equals 0. On the next line, words missed equals 0. And we'll reset play again button label to the string another word, since that's what the next value of this button should be. Now let's test this out in preview. And now I don't want to guess the first word correctly, but I will guess the next 2 correctly. And after guessing cat, notice the button says restart game. That's what I wanted. The game status message also says, you've tried all of the words, restart game from the beginning. That's what we wanted as well. Now look at our game status up here. We've got words guessed as 2, words missed as 1. There are no more words to guess, so the values look good, but let's press that restart game button. We don't get our crash here. The game stats reset perfectly, but I can guess Swift. Look at the button name now. Another word it says in here, so reset the button name for me. Perfect, just what I want. And I'll guess the word dog, but I won't guess the word cat correctly. Then I get my restart game button and the appropriate message. Game Maker, your game is looking slick. Now all we have to do is add some animation and sound, and we'll do that in the next video. Keep hacking.